Hello, everyone. I'm Jordan Chitley, the editor of Globe Drive here at the Globe and Mail, and I'd like to welcome you all in the room today and those watching the live stream across Canada to the Future of Automotive event. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the Globe and Mail's headquarters is situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and we are grateful for the opportunity to gather and learn here today. Over the course of the next couple of hours, we'll talk about the future of the automotive industry for automakers and consumers. A lot of what we're going to talk about today involves trade and tariffs and stuff that is really happening day to day, largely based on what's happening to with our neighbors down south. If you're joining us in person today, I would like to invite you to stay for some refreshments and networking after the event. And I'm also pleased to be co-moderating today with Patrina Gentili, who's a frequent contributor to Globe Drive and saves my butt a lot with covering stories and catching my mistakes. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Toyota, who has hosted this event many times in the past, and we're very grateful that they continue to do so. We can have discussions like this. All right, now we are going to begin with our first panel discussion, automotive manufacturing in Canada, industry updates and innovations. All right, we have a great lineup. First up, Greta Kudelenko, founder and CEO of Acerta Analytics. Next, we have Brendan Sweeney, Managing Director of Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing. And finally, we have Scott McKenzie, Director and General Manager of Corporate and External Affairs at Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada.
Thank you.
All right, I also want to note that if you are watching on the live stream and you have questions, we will be taking audience questions toward the end of this. But if you are watching on the live stream and you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat box and we will answer them toward the end. All right, the big question I have for all of you is, I guess the governments invest a lot of money into manufacturing cars here. So the big question is, why does making cars matter? Like, why is it important to do it here? Why is it important for us and for the government? Scott, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you.
You're on. You're good.
Okay, thanks. Manufacturing is important, and irrespective of what you might think of the current actions of the U.S. administration, I think they recognize that manufacturing is important. It's important for countries to make things. And, the question is, why make cars? We can make lots of things. We also make planes. We make many things here. But with automotive manufacturing, it's highly specialized. It's very quick. If you were to visit one of our plants in Ontario, we're lining off a car, every 59 seconds. A lot has to happen. There's a tremendous amount of coordination for that to happen. So the R&D and skill required to enable that is, I think, much more advanced than you'd see in some other manufacturing industries. And because of that, and I'm sure Greta will get into this, we develop a bit of an ecosystem around automotive manufacturing where you've got suppliers, vendors, technology providers, all working in close consort with automotive OEMs to make sure that we're as efficient in our manufacturing as possible. So it's a fascinating space.
Greta, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, of course. So as Scott alluded, automotive industry is really huge. When I first started in the industry, what fascinated me is that, compared to many others, it's over $1 trillion industry. And often we kind of think of it as just, the end product, the consumer vehicle, as being the automotive industry. But it's far more than that. It's a network of every major assembler and supplier to that industry. It's all of the subcomponent, the gears, the panels we see, the infotainment, software producers, third-party suppliers like we at Acerta. So it creates a huge industry around it. And so when we're thinking automotive, it's really not just, the brand names that we're thinking. It's really a whole network, an ecosystem of providers around it. And secondary, I often also think of automotive as not just again, passenger cars, but transportation, right? It's the trucks, it's the buses, and many other vehicles that we create, that a lot of those suppliers to the automotive industry are actually supplying into that broader transportation place as well. So if we're not kind of supporting the automotive industry, we're really taking away from a major network of suppliers and capability that we're developing in Canada.
So, Brendan, what is it about cars that are special in a way? Like, apart from other things we could manufacture?
Sure. One, the direct economic benefits, the direct economic impacts of a vehicle assembly plant are just so much greater than most other manufacturing or non-manufacturing establishments. The size, the scale, and the ability to leverage the talent, the people that we have here, and frankly, compensate those people better than they would get anywhere else. So we really make good use of talent here and compensate that talent accordingly. Two, and as Greta mentioned, there's just a whole network of suppliers, whether that's parts, whether that's steel coming out of Hamilton or Contrecoeur, whether that's robotics, or increasingly software. And I think that sometimes we don't necessarily, we'll focus on the direct jobs, we'll focus on the jobs at Magna, and that's great. But I think the ability of the automotive industry to provide a starting point or a springboard for small Canadian-owned companies, including software companies, is really important. And some of those companies will start off in the automotive industry and grow alongside the automotive industry. Others will start in the automotive industry and diversify. And I think, Acerta is a good example of one of those companies. So the automotive industry is a springboard for startups, scale-ups, and establishing Canadian companies with Canadian technology.
Scott, Toyota's had a complicated year, I would say, trying to negotiate tariffs and
That's
trade.
a great word.
What word would you put it to it? I was thinking of some other words, but I wanted to be nice.
Complicated is a good word. It's certainly been interesting and dynamic. I mean, every day brings a new surprise. But our approach has just been trying to stay calm. And when I say that, whatever the U.S. administration in particular is trying to do, and then whatever the Canadian government is trying to do in response, you're getting push and pull in different directions. But when you take a step back and look at the automotive industry in North America, we perform a lot better when we're integrated, meaning you've got part suppliers across all three countries, US, Canada, and Mexico. You've got OEMs located in all three countries. They're deeply integrated. You could have second and third party providers feeding into that system. And it works best when it's all working together. And when it's compartmentalized and you have, the United States as an example, trying to make things only in the United States using content from the United States, or the same thing in Canada or Mexico, you're not going to be as efficient, and honestly, your output, meaning your product, is not going to be as good or as competitive. So at the end of the day, we think, that's where we're going to end up. There's a lot of noise at the moment, but we're just trying to, keep calm and carry on, and make sure that we come out on the other side, and we're still in a good space.
a year ago, we really had no idea what was going to happen with tariffs. And I remember speaking to Andrew Gordon, who was our representative from Toyota then, and he was just, I was asking him these trade and tariff questions, and he was like, we have no idea what's coming. We're planning to keep all of our manufacturing in Canada. But after everything that you just said, is it still profitable to make cars in Canada?
Profitable? No, it isn't. Like, we're not profitable right now, but I would caution everyone, we're not profitable in the United States right now either. We're not profitable in Mexico. I think the entire industry right now is suffering, and I'm not just speaking on behalf of Toyota when I say that. I think if you look at the balance sheets of all of the large automotive OEMs, they've all been impacted. I think the strategy behind this has been to, clearly move production into the United States, but they're also suffering from tariff impacts. So all of the inputs that go into cars, steel, aluminum parts coming from overseas, there's tremendous tariff impact into our U.S. operations as well. So, are we profitable right now making cars anywhere in North America? I would say no. I think we'll all come out the other side of this, but obviously our countries need to negotiate and come to a better outcome. But I'm pretty confident that we'll be in a good space eventually.
Greta, did you want to add to that? I see you nodding along.
No, I completely agree. Like right now, we're also seeing, because of the impacts, there's a general perspective of just hold and wait. A lot of manufacturers are slowing down certain investments as a result. So, if we think about it, this time of change, you would want to invest again into internal operations, drive down costs, find ways to come to profitability, but it's difficult given you don't know what happens on the next day. And just one more thing in terms of just, impact to US operations as well. So one of the things that's interesting that I'm seeing in certain facilities in the US, if they're inefficient right now, they can stay inefficient because they're not as concerned about competition from outside of the US currently, which is honestly a little bit concerning because you want to be driving innovation and improvement globally as opposed to, through protectionism, creating more inefficiency in internal manufacturing.
I would just say companies are investing right now. We just announced a $1 billion plus investment in our Canadian operations around the next generation RAV4. But that's been in the works for a while. We're happy to move forward with that, and we are. I would say there's not a lot of strategic investments going on. And when I say that, if you take a step back to 3-4 years ago, everybody, ourselves included, maybe at a different pace than others, but everybody was moving into electric vehicles, investing in battery supply chains, that sort of thing. That's all stopped, honestly speaking. So people are executing plans that they already had. But even the regulatory environment in the United States around emissions reduction, completely in flux. And as a company, that impacts what cars you're designing and building. How do you plan for that? I mean, really, how do you plan for a scenario where maybe you have a different administration in the United States in 2028, or maybe you don't? But that type of uncertainty is really difficult. So our approach has been, pretty consistent. It's actually been multi-powertrain. We can adjust based on where the market goes. It gives us much more flexibility to react to those sorts of things, but there isn't really a clear strategic direction at the moment.
Because for the most part, when you begin to think of like a new car to come to market, it's maybe 6 or 7 years until it's like we're driving it. So
it's about 4 or 5 for us, for start to finish, when we start building or designing a car until we execute and bring it to market. But yeah, it's a long time.
Either way, it's like longer than an administration, like a U.S. presidential administration. So
yes.
You have to think long term on a lot of these things. Brendan, how has manufacturing evolved over the years?
In
like
Canada,
in auto manufacturing.
Well,
Yeah, I know it's a pretty broad question, but
in Canada, it's changed. Who's doing what has changed, and we've largely seen a flip between US-based automakers and Japan-based automakers, where last year Toyota and Honda did 77% of all the vehicles in Canada. And I don't know if we see that changing in the near future. We've also seen a bit of contraction in the parts manufacturing industry, and a bit of change. There's virtually no US-based parts suppliers of operating in Canada outside of Flex and Gate right now. So there's big changes there. And there's going to be changes again. And so we're keeping tabs on those for the time being. And it's moving pieces, moving parts every day.
Greta, before you answer, do you want to just tell people, I probably should have done this at the beginning, but say a bit about what your company does and to set up your next answer.
Yeah, for sure. So we work with many manufacturers globally to help them leverage data that they're generating in production to drive efficiency and automation within the production floor, primarily to drive efficiencies in how quickly parts are manufactured into the car, drive down quality issues, and really improve cost of poor quality within production. We leverage AI to help manufacturers do that and become a lot more predictive in their operations today. And so we work with a lot of parts suppliers specifically to help them, improve their margins, become more competitive globally, and really optimize how quickly they can, get to the next part or how costly they can make it. One of the things we've seen changing in manufacturing, so one element is a lot of the parts suppliers, again, as the potential for the automotive market to slow down, they're looking for alternatives, right? So one of the companies we work with, Ballard Power Systems, they produce fuel cells, right? So for a while now, they've been looking at opportunities outside of the passenger car market. So whether that's large, buses and trucks, or even shipping, so the ships and other forms of transportation. And similar, we're seeing in Linamar, and they're trying to get into other forms of manufacturing now, from medical devices to a lot of agricultural equipment. So a lot of diversification that suppliers are looking at doing to drive this down. And secondary, I think globally what we're seeing is a lot of investment into AI-based automation and really driving down efficiencies. The one thing I will say, though, with Canadian parts suppliers and manufacturers, we're often laggards when it comes to adopting innovation. So even though in Canada we're generating, the best AI research, we're leading in a lot of that, I would say we're still very slow in adopting that and commercializing it. So even till this day, only 5% of our business's operation is within Canadian production line. And everything else for us is globally being adopted. And we see this even from some of our investors. So BDC Industrial is one of the investors in Acerta. And we hear even from their portfolio that a lot of their companies are selling globally first before getting that adoption in Canada. So I do think kind of as manufacturing shifts and as we want to become more competitive globally, we'll need to accelerate how fast we're adopting this internally as well.
On that note, like, automakers can make cars anywhere. Mm-hmm. So why Canada? Brendan, do you want to go first?
In Canada, and particularly in Southern Ontario, the literacy, numeracy, and problem-solving abilities of the average person are better than almost anywhere in the world. You've also got the case that violent crime and corruption are much lower in Canada, leading to a much higher quality of life than in a lot of other places where automakers are starting to think about or are putting plants. And, we see the announcement, the Ford Blue Oval City. It's near Memphis, and that's in one of the most impoverished parts of the United States. And I think they're going to have trouble getting that off the ground. So there's all that. And then, quality of life, I think, is important when you can offer that. And when you can offer quality of life alongside a skilled and diverse workforce, alongside, and I think we need to in Southern Ontario and in Quebec give ourselves a bit more credit for this, we have a very diverse economy. And so if you're looking for local software developers, if you're looking for local AI companies, if you're looking for local robotics companies, even for the more kind of administrative parts of running a massive assembly plant and supply chain, if you need insurance, if you need logistics companies, it's all here. So I think all of those combined gives Southern Ontario, gives Quebec, and gives Canada broadly some advantages over some of the other places with which we are competing for investments, i.e. Memphis, Tennessee, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and parts of Mexico.
Scott?
I would agree. I would, unfortunately, at the moment, add also proximity to one of the world's largest markets in the United States. So that, the reason we're as big as we are is because we sell into the U.S. And that's obviously under threat right now. I won't belabor again why I think that'll get resolved eventually. But access to one of the world's, or actually the world's second largest automotive market. And like Brendan said, just within Toyota, we have the most educated workforce of any plant in the world. We've got 73 plants globally, and we have people with university degrees, assembling cars because it pays well. But because of that, we have higher degrees of innovation amongst our workforce. We have, production team members designing apps on the production floor that we're actually using in production. That's not happening in a lot of other places, and it allows us to be more efficient. Some of the things that Greta covered around data management and using that to drive performance. We do that, I think, more effectively than most places, and it's a huge strategic advantage for us.
So we have the skills, we have the resources, we have the know-how. Greta, is it possible to make an affordable, car completely made in Canada and sell it to Canadians?
I believe so, and I think we should aim for that. I kind of see it in two parts. In one, we have great manufacturers like Toyota here, and I think we have a lot of the suppliers and the resources. So why not? We don't have to design the car, but we can manufacture it start to end, probably through all of the resources we have here in Canada. And from a second perspective, so Automotive Parts Manufacturing Association, or APMA, have done a bit of a concept car called their Project Aero, right? It's an all Canadian electric vehicle, which was actually fully designed in Canada as well, but using all of the Canadian manufacturers' content. So I think it's very feasible to do it, and we have suppliers who have supplied US for years in competitive prices to do it in a way that is economical for the United States. So why not create a vehicle that we can develop here? And we're actually driving more feasibility studies to assess that through the APMA right now as well.
I have a slightly different point of view.
I was going to say before you went, we have so many reader comments that we try to make a point to put in all of our stories now where a car is being assembled. And we have so many people that comment, say, oh, it's being made wherever. I'm not going to buy it. They only want to buy Canadian-made vehicles. Although I'm not sure they actually know which vehicles are being made in Canada. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, I would just say, could we make all of those things in Canada, all the ingredients of the car? Of course, there's no technical limitation. We could do all of that. Could it be competitive? I would ask, competitive with who? Could it be competitive with the United States? Maybe. Would it be competitive with a car made in Europe or a car made in Asia that is using, sources outside or within that region that are lower cost? Competitive is a relative word, and you'd have to decide who you're trying to compete against. If you're only making things in Canada using Canadian labor, as great as it is, meeting Canadian regulations, I don't think you would be competitive versus a car that's made in, for instance, Europe, that is using some parts and components from Eastern Europe, which is a lower, labor content space. Same thing in, in Southeast Asia or Asia. But that, again, lends into why USMCA and NAFTA before that was so successful, is that we had the integration of 3 economies in North America, and we could benefit from, the best parts of each of them. And so, could you do that all in Canada and be competitive? Again, that would be pretty challenging.
Do you want to add to that, Brendan?
Oh boy, do I. Longtime Globe and Mail reporter Greg Keenan and I wrote a short report, fun little report, not quite a feasibility study, but I guess a think piece in January on this. And 3 things come to mind, 3 things from that report. 1, we're really close to having a Canadian car company that makes a Canadian car profitably. The problem is it only has 3 wheels, and that's the BRP Can-Am Spyder. So 1 more wheel, we wouldn't need to have this conversation. So we're close.
Yeah.
2, the biggest challenge is not manufacturing the thing, is not making a fascia or making suspension components. It's designing a vehicle that people will want to buy in 5 years and in 10 years and in 15 years, and that does not duplicate a RAV4 or a Honda Civic or a half-ton pickup truck. And so it doesn't need to be completely off the wall, but we kind of think, well, there was a time in 1962 when there was no Mustang, and then in 1965 there was. There was a time when there was no minivan or a Subaru, and then there was. So it's kind of coming up with that idea. But then 3, we said, okay, if we kind of add up our relative strengths, should we be focusing on making, a Canadian car or a Canadian car company, or should we think about maybe making a Canadian car factory with Canadian technology, Canadian software, Canadian IP, and just making the best, most efficient, most productive, most innovative platform to make cars rather than to make the car itself. And maybe we'll put Greta in charge of that, or at least of the AI. So,
If I can throw out a suggestion, if you make a all-wheel drive station wagon, I know at least 5 people, and I think they all write for Globe Drive who would want to buy that station wagon.
Canadian made, did you say?
Yeah.
I could sell you one that's not made in Canada.
All right, we only have a few minutes left. But quickly, USMCA is being renegotiated in the summer. I'll start with you, Scott. Do you have any predictions on where this may go, or what you would like to see?
What I would like to see is what we had before, which was duty-free access for all 3 countries, into the other countries. I think at some point that will be the result. I don't know if that's going to be the result in the next year or even the next 2 years, but I think eventually people are going to figure out that that's the best way to do things. And if you don't do things that way, so for instance, if the U.S. insists on tariffs coming into the United States, I have it on pretty good authority that Canada is going to insist on tariffs coming back into Canada. And you need to understand that especially the U.S. domestic manufacturers, they rely on the Canadian market. If you look at the products that they specialize in, they're only sold in certain jurisdictions, and it's really the U.S. and Canada. I'm talking full-size pickup trucks, SUVs, 3-row SUVs, that sort of thing. There's limited markets for that, and I don't think Canada's going to cede access to the Canadian market easily. I think everyone will probably figure out that tariffs in multiple directions is just going to make things expensive. That'll impact people's ability to afford the products that we're making, and eventually I think sooner or saner heads will prevail, but I can't predict how quickly that will happen.
And you would have trouble bringing in the new Highlander that you just revealed last night, which seems like will be a big hit.
Yeah, we're going to make that in Kentucky. Right now, the federal government announced its new automotive platform last week, for lack of a better word. And one of the things they announced would be like a tradable credit for an import credit. And that benefits us. We're Canada's largest automotive manufacturer, but some margin. I think we would be in a good spot. So I think we would be able to bring that.
Well, I
from
hope
the
so.
United States into Canada. I'm not sure if everyone would be in the same spot, though.
I have a feeling it will sell well here. So, Greta, predictions on USMCA negotiations?
I think I'm in the same boat as Scott. I would just hope that, there's going to be back to that collaborative environment across the countries where some of this uncertainty will go away for the manufacturers. But I think in parallel, as Canada, we just continue to look for other partners and look for more ways to drive economic growth and activity within our country, and prepare just in case, it doesn't go the way we're hoping.
Yeah, it certainly seems like after 6 decades of building this like Jenga tower of collaboration between the two and then 3 countries, and then all of a sudden someone just like pulls out a bottom piece, and it's it would be nice to restore the bottom piece there.
Stability is good.
Brendan.
The tradable import credit idea advanced last week on Thursday as part of the automotive strategy is a really, really good idea. So we're excited to hear more about that. But we also want to just kind of get the tariffs off. And Donald Trump says, oh, well, we don't need cars from Canada. We don't need cars from Mexico. Donald Trump is wrong. The United States made about 8 million vehicles last year. The United States, or customers in the United States, bought about 16 million vehicles last year. So that's a big gap. You would have to take all the assembly plants in Canada, put them in the US, all the assembly plants in Mexico, put them in the US, then all the assembly plants in Mexico again, and put them in the US, if you want to make 16 million vehicles in the United States and stop exporting. That's unrealistic to do in a lifetime, let alone a presidential term. So because of that, I mean, there's a general confidence that we will get back to some semblance of normality or new normal or whatever we want to call it. At the same time, the President of the United States can only stand in the way of the profitability, the productivity, and the innovative capability of companies in the United States for so long before those companies push back in a meaningful way, and we think we'll see this in 2026.
All right, on that note, we are almost running out of time, but we do have time for a few audience questions. We'll start with anyone in the room. I will ask, though, before you ask your question, please wait for a microphone, and there is one being people walking around. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. Are there questions online, Lisa?
Yes, there are lots of questions
okay.
in the queue
All right,
here.
we're going to
one question the viewer is asking, what is the role of government to support Canada's automotive manufacturing?
Brendan, you want to start? Scott, you want to start?
It's an important role, and I think the strategy that was announced last week, which really had kind of 3 components: infrastructure, the EV sales and greenhouse gases, and manufacturing. Finally, we're seeing a strategy that's more than an economic development brochure, that actually has some strategic points. And so that's exactly the role of the government in supporting the automotive industry right now.
Scott?
I would just say within its control, creating the conditions for companies to be successful. And we use the word competitiveness. We need to be competitive making cars in Canada, and governments can introduce policy that helps us be competitive. And I think they're trying to do that.
Greta?
Yeah, I'll add, I think it's also a huge role in driving innovation. We work with an organization that is funded through the government called Next Generation Manufacturing, or ENGINE, and in our experience been a huge driver of accelerating major manufacturers in Canada adopting innovation and new technology within their operations, and as a result making us us as a country and our capability more competitive. And I think supporting in such a way to remove barriers to drive that innovation and experiment with it is a huge support in accelerating our competitiveness.
Lisa, is there one more question online? I think we have time for one more.
We have quite a few questions in here. Let's just see if we can pick one out. A viewer asked, about would the renewal of the old auto pact with the USA be a reasonable compromise if CUSMA fails?
The newer proposed remission credit trading system that the government spoke about last week is effectively the same thing. It's the same same purpose, meaning if you make a car in Canada, we'll let you bring one in. That's effectively how the Auto Pact worked. And this, they haven't announced any details or anything like that, but I think that's what they're trying to do. So it assures some level of automotive assembly in Canada, because companies like mine and the other ones who assemble here, and maybe some who don't assemble here today, would have some reason to make cars here. Because Canada is a large car market. We're not as big as the United States. We're probably 1/9 the size of the United States. But I think we're number 8 overall globally in units, and maybe number 6 in terms of value. That's not small. And I think we need to recognize that and appreciate it.
Do you guys have anything to add?
And anything that resembles concepts from the Auto Pact, where we leverage our market for vehicles, the 8th largest in the world, and at the same time reward the good behavior of companies that are investing in Canada and will continue to invest in Canada. And if those concepts come together into a broader strategy, a broader policy, we would welcome that.
It's a great note to end on. Brendan, Greta, Scott, thank you very much for being here today and providing us with all of your insights.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right, I am now going to turn it over to Patrina.
Thank you, Jordan. That was great. And thank you, Brendan, Greta, and Scott. A lot of great information there. Now we're going to focus on EVs. And there is a lot of recent news surrounding mandates, incentives, Chinese EVs coming into Canada at a 6% tariff rate instead of 100%. So lots to discuss. So joining us now are our esteemed panelists, starting with Hadrian Mertens-Kirkwood. He's the senior researcher at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And we also have Abdel Ali. He's the founder and CEO of KiwiCharge, a robotics and AI startup focused on improving EV charging in apartment buildings and condos. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I want to start off by talking about Prime Minister Carney last week, his big announcements. He's returning the EV rebates for consumers, and for OEMs, he's scrapping those EV sales mandates that require them to have 100% ZEV vehicle sales by 2035. Hadrian, let's start with you. What's your reaction to all this news?
Yeah, I mean, EV policy's tricky because governments are actually trying to do a bunch of things that may or may not be compatible. So on the one hand, we have a kind of a consumer angle here where we want cheap EVs. So we want the incentives help, you want more competition, and so on. Second leg of this is trying to support industry, domestic industry, specifically supporting all the jobs and all the other spin-off benefits we just heard about. And then we also have the climate angle, which kind of we don't talk about very much anymore, but is actually still a very either explicit or implicit argument for EVs, is that it's for climate. And this new strategy tries to kind of strike this balance between those 3 pillars, and I think it kind of broadly does in a way that it sort of checks all the boxes without being perfect on any front. It's the kind of strategy that no one's going to be super mad about. Everyone could have been a bit happier, and I guess that kind of means it's a good compromise, but there's certainly more they could have done for consumers, more they could have done for industry, and definitely more they could have done on the climate front.
Abdel, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think he's doing a fantastic job, and for us specifically at KiwiCharge, the infrastructure layer, I think that's exactly where government can make a big impact. When it came to vehicles initially, back in the days, they paved the roads, they created the infrastructure that allowed for vehicle adoption. So we think that's a perfect space for governments to play. It's a public good, and we're really excited about what that brings to us as well.
But with a new greenhouse gas emission standard that the Prime Minister announced, now the target is to have 90% of vehicle sales of EVs by 2040. is the government just pushing back the mandate, like you say, with the environmental effects? What's the difference now?
There's some big differences. There's a big difference between an aspirational target, which is we would like to hit 90%, versus like a regulatory mandate, which says we will hit 100% and we're going to make you do it. And we aren't good at hitting aspirational targets. We are better at hitting like firm regulatory targets, and we see that in other sectors. Like electricity, we can incentivize renewable electricity, or you can phase out coal power, and that actually worked, right? That's the most successful climate policy we've done in North American history, is phasing out coal power in Canada. But it was not optional, it was not an incentive. We said you cannot use coal anymore. We still have some exceptions for still coal plants, but that is a very successful policy. The greenhouse gas standards in this new strategy, I mean, we don't know what that's gonna look like. But I think it's really important to recognize from a climate perspective, an EV is not good for the environment, right? An EV uses a ton of materials, creates a ton of emissions. It is much better than an internal combustion engine. But simply adding EVs is not a climate strategy. If you have 10 internal combustion engines on the road, you add 10 EVs, you cut your emissions intensity in half, but you didn't reduce emissions. And from a climate perspective, the only thing that matters is absolute emissions. And that's the big difference in this strategy, is we're trying to incentivize putting more EVs on the road, which is better for consumers, better for industry, but we're not taking internal combustion engines out of the picture in the same way, and that's a big problem from a climate perspective.
So what's the solution then?
You have to actually have regulation. I mean, the mandate, there were problems with the mandate, especially for manufacturers and also for consumers, but it did say you can't just add, you have to replace. So we need something that actually takes those internal combustion engines off the road. And we can talk more about other countries that have done it. But like in Norway, for example, which is almost at 100% EV adoption, it's not just through incentives. They put huge taxes on internal combustion engines, for example. So you need sticks and carrots. You can't incentivize your way to 100%.
Will this improve or increase EV adoption, Abdel?
I believe so. At Kiwi Charge, we believe EV is inevitable. From a technology lens, it is a superior product from an internal combustion vehicle. There are factors that are preventing wide EV adoption, like price, like range anxiety, like charging infrastructure. We're doing our part from the charging infrastructure perspective, but the reality is, battery costs are decreasing. 2024, batteries decreased by 20%, and last year another 8%. So the price is decreasing, and it will reach price parity, and it has the potential to be cheaper than internal combustion vehicles. And the other aspect is China. They showed that they can produce cars, they can capture economies of scale and produce cars that are cheaper and far superior than some of the cars that we're seeing in the market right now. So we think it's inevitable, and policies like that ensures that Canada is part of that revolution, that EV revolution.
Well, we have these 49,000 Chinese EVs coming into Canada now too. They actually won't qualify for the EV rebates. That's only available for vehicles that are imported from a country that already has a pre-existing free trade deal. Hadrian, does this give other EVs a fighting chance in the marketplace?
Yeah, it's a start. I think the 49,000 vehicles, it's not a huge share of the actual vehicle market. In Canada, a lot of people have talked about that. It's about 3% of sales. So on the face of it, it's not a huge deal. It could become a bigger one. I mean, that quota is supposed to rise over time. If Chinese manufacturers get established in Canada, that creates a whole bunch of other incentives and kind of network effects. And the thing about quotas and tariffs is, as we've seen, they can change overnight. It's not impossible that a government in 5 years would just kind of add a zero to the end of that quota, and all of a sudden you have 500,000 Chinese cars being imported. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but the point is there's no reason it couldn't happen. So this is at risk of kind of falling into a slippery slope argument. I think it's that in the near term, 49,000 Chinese EVs, it's on the margins, but it could be a step towards something more transformative in the domestic market.
And I think, to Adrian's point, it's absolutely not going to impact the manufacturers here. It's a small number, but I think it's going to encourage innovation. And more competition and better resources for customers. It becomes an anchor point. People are going to have a new benchmark to compare current EVs in the market. And from an innovation perspective, once you see what technologies are available, it creates opportunities for partnerships, collaborations. So we think from an innovation perspective, that excites us as a startup.
But there are so many questions about, these vehicles. How do you decide which Chinese vehicles will be coming into Canada? The dealership network for it, where do you service them? How much are they going to cost? Do you guys have any, and when can consumers start buying them? Hadrian?
We don't know. I mean, this came up in the last panel too, is like a lot of this stuff's happening in real time. We don't know what it's going to look like. In the short term, it's not going to be like BYD on the streets, right? Like it's going to be companies like Tesla, which are already established in Canada, manufacture vehicles in Shanghai, and then they'll import those. So it won't, in the immediate term, it's not going to look that different for us. The big question is, will this incentivize Chinese manufacturers to kind of set up shop here? And what will their kind of retail network look like? Will they be assembling here or just importing? There's a lot of open questions, and we don't know right now.
Yeah, definitely very opaque. It's developing live, but it's really. I think the key is strategic. Creating a fair competitive environment. So policies that address that will be crucial. We want to make sure that Canada doesn't become a dumping ground for technology. It becomes a fair trade, and finding ways to make it a mutual, reciprocal relationship.
Now, with this surge of Chinese EVs coming to market and EV rebates, what is that going to do to sales of vehicles in Canada? Because we've certainly seen a drop in sales. Q3 of 2025, EV sales were down 40% registrations compared to the year before in Q3 of 2024. Is this going to give us a boost in sales and adoption?
Yes, is the short answer. I mean, we, as you point out, a bunch of incentives expired at the federal and provincial level, and then EV sales fell in half in Canada. We're the only major economy in the world that went backwards on EVs last year, right? And bringing back the incentives will probably bump us back up to a similar number. I mean, one interesting piece of context that's different now is actually the elimination of the consumer carbon tax. Because the value of that is actually about $500 a year to an internal combustion engine. So over the lifetime of a car, it's $5,000 to $10,000 incentive we just created for gas cars. So reintroducing the EV tax credit only kind of matches that. Now psychologically, as a consumer, that's not the same thing. $5,000 up front is not the same thing as you just paying less for gas that adds up to more than $5,000. But just the incentive is not the same now as it was before. And we're hearing that this incentive is also going to kind of decline over 5 years. It might only be $5,000 in the first year. So it's actually a weaker incentive, all things considered, now than it was 2 years ago.
I can actually share an anecdotal story. So we actually had a building director, someone that sits on the board, reach out to us from BC because of the news. So they're considering EVs. They're looking at the infrastructure in the buildings to encourage and support EV adoption. So consumers are paying attention. Price is a sensitive topic, and it is a factor. So just that promise, that potential is creating demand and is getting people talking.
And that price, are we looking at what, 10 or 15,000 less than an all-electric vehicle? They're quite expensive now, over 70,000.
Yeah,
price.
We'll see. I mean, part of the China agreement is that half of that quota has to be filled with vehicles sell for, and there's like a lot of asterisks around that, less than $35,000. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what a consumer would be paying in Canada. It's not really clear on what counts in the price. There's a lot of different things that add up towards the final price. Nominally, that would be very cheap for an EV in Canada, and in theory, that could put competitive pressure on other manufacturers to lower prices. But again, if it's only half of 25,000 cars, it's probably not going to do that. So it's a step in that direction. But I think to suggest that Chinese EVs are going to transform the EV market, I think, is premature.
What are the challenges of bringing these Chinese EVs to Canada when it comes to the regulatory clearance and compliance issues?
I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, so I'm going to be careful. I mean, we do already import cars from lots of different places. We have standards in place. Again, it's going to depend whether it's just importing a vehicle versus doing some degree of assembly and things in Canada that changes the equation.
So we're a hardware startup. So one thing I learned is the whole certification process, and it is a time-consuming process. There is standards that they'll have to abide by. So that will play definitely will play a factor in terms of when they'll be able to import and when they'll be able to deploy. Where we create robots that charge vehicles, so the charging port connection itself, there's different standards, North American standard, European standards. So, adapting the product for the local market, those are factors that they'll have to definitely consider.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford said Chinese vehicles could be spy cars. Do we need to worry about these Chinese vehicles being roaming surveillance operations?
I actually think it's a really interesting question. I mean, the answer is it's plausible, but it's also, I mean, in this room right now, there's hundreds of spy devices, right? Yes. and I don't say that kind of flippantly. The point is that all of our connected vehicles are surveillance software. All of our devices are surveillance software. And that's not to excuse Chinese vehicles, which could potentially do the same thing, but it's maybe we should be thinking about what is our kind of broader privacy framework, regulatory framework. Like we haven't updated our privacy laws since like 2001 in Canada, and some things have changed since then on the digital front. So I think this is a good kind of entryway to have that conversation about like what data can any vehicle collect, where can that data be stored, things like that. I don't know that Chinese vehicles are inherently more threatening, frankly, than any other vehicle on that front.
What do you think, Abdel?
Yeah, I just want to echo. It's absolutely right. If they really want to tune in and hear what Abdel's saying, they'll probably use my phone before the car. But the reality is, I don't think it's a hardware problem, and I don't think that's the right way to think about it. It's a software, it's a cybersecurity policy problem, and if you just focus on the hardware and just ban hardware, you're just depriving society from all that benefit. It's about coming with strategic plans. I love Doug Ford. He helped us connect with Infrastructure Ontario. So I hate to say this, but I think he's wrong in that.
I want to turn now a little bit to the infrastructure. A lot of consumers complain about the lack of infrastructure in Canada, lack of charging stations. The Prime Minister is promising $1.5 billion to improve the EV charging network. Is that enough to support, increased demand and these new EVs coming in from China?
It is our wheelhouse. So for context, Kiwi Charge, we build robots that make electrifying parking lots of buildings very accessible. We reduce the cost dramatically. So I think infrastructure is such a key point to encourage EV adoption. I think it's a move in the right direction. And, creating access, making EV charging accessible, and for most people, not having access to charging at home is a big deciding factor. We're doing our part from an innovation perspective in terms of, creating access in buildings. There are challenges that we're facing. So we're hardware, we're not fixed to the wall. So a lot of these mandates don't fit our business model and our innovation. But it's definitely in the right direction. Whether it's enough, it really does depend on EV adoption, the rate of EV adoption, and where that capital is deployed. Those are, the nuances when it comes to new technologies, new innovations, and the platform change. And it's hard to say.
I think this is a really good case, and I'm glad you brought up the roads before, because it's such an obvious illustration of like a car's not very useful if there's no roads, right? And that for EVs, we need to build the charging infrastructure first, so that people can plug in their cars. And we can't have a reactive market when it comes to charging infrastructure. We can't wait until we have too many EVs and then say, oh no, we don't have enough chargers. And we don't right now. I mean, we've got about 40,000 public chargers in Canada, but this is exactly why the work you're doing is so important. Right now most people do charge at home because the kinds of people who own EVs are high-income households with their own homes. But we're trying to get everyone driving EVs in apartment buildings and condos and multi-unit residences and stuff where you don't have an obvious place to charge. It's a big barrier. Some modeling suggests we have about 40,000 chargers now. We would need to build 40,000 more per year to keep up with demand. I think that's kind of at the high end, but even if it's half of that, like our pace of construction is nowhere near where it needs to be to encourage the level of EV adoption we want to see.
And is the power, sorry, go ahead.
And if I might say a small anecdote from our experience, it's a chicken or egg. Once you introduce charging infrastructure, people buy more EVs. So you're creating demand, you're encouraging EV adoption. And to your point regarding making EVs accessible to all and reducing the cost and making it accessible to everyone, if you're not able to charge your car in buildings, EV makers, EV manufacturers won't create products for that segment. So how do you address those challenges? How do you create the demand? And a big part of it is setting up the charging infrastructure before the EVs are introduced.
And I might also add, sometimes that infrastructure is not going to be profitable, and that's why you need the public sector. There are lots of places where it is. If you could build some big for-profit charging infrastructure on the 401, you're going to make your money back. But we also need it in every small community in Canada, and every 30, 40 kilometers along small highways, we need charging infrastructure. And private companies probably aren't going to build that if they don't think they're going to make a lot of money back in the medium term. And so there is absolutely a role here, maybe not the primary role, but you still need the public sector to build this infrastructure because it is in the public interest to do so. And it takes away a lot of the concerns we have about EV adoption in lots of different contexts.
But is the power grid ready for all these extra cars?
Yeah. Right now, EVs don't use a lot of power in the aggregate. It's less than 1% of power demand nationally. In theory, if we were to replace all 30 million registered vehicles with EVs, it would take a bigger chunk out of that. I don't think it's it's a concern in the context of an overburdened grid, I guess. It's just not the only concern. We're talking about bringing all these AI data centers in, for example, and a 100 megawatt AI data center, which is at the kind of medium size, uses as much power as 100,000 homes. So, and these LNG facilities in BC are using as much power as millions of homes, or potentially if we expand them. So there's all sorts of demands on the electricity grid. We're also trying to replace natural gas heating with heat pumps, for example. All of this stuff is good, but we need way more power. So I don't know that EVs are the what breaks the camel's back, but it's just one more demand on a grid that needs to expand aggressively.
And there are ways to mitigate that risk, right? So you can have move charging at night where there is excess capacity. There is battery storage that you can store energy during off-peak and distribute it during peak. So those are areas we're exploring and we're really excited about.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because you have a really cool innovation, an autonomous robot that goes around in apartment buildings and condos and charges while people are sleeping. And I understand that you're going to be displaying this tomorrow at the Canadian International Auto Show, along with Project Aero that Greta talked about earlier as well, the Borealis and the vector concepts. So tell me about this technology, because it is quite innovative.
Yeah, I promise I didn't pay her to say for that plug. So Kiwi, we have these robots. It's batteries on wheels, and it's able to go to the car, connect to the car, and charge your vehicle at night while you sleep. So it solves a lot of those problems, right? We're able to charge the vehicles at night. So we take demand out. For a lot of these vehicles, they would have had to charge their cars at work or during daytime. So we take that demand and we move it during off-peak. And we can also charge our batteries and distribute it to the buildings, distribute it to other vehicles if needed. But to your point, Project Aero is a fantastic example of Canadian innovation, building technology, building the vehicles in Canada. We have the talent, we have the resources. There are some challenges in terms of the size of the market, but today I learned Canada is number 8 in the world. So there is a lot of opportunities when it comes to innovation and solutions, Canadian-made solutions to global problems.
And Hadrian, I know that Brandon addressed this before as well about the chance of building a Canadian made car, or Canadian company, or a Canadian platform. What do you see?
I think the previous panel covered it well. I think technically we could, and I think there are reasons to pursue it that aren't necessarily immediate economic gain. I mean, the bottom line is we export 90% of our cars to the US, something that we heard a lot about. If trying to build a car exclusively for the Canadian market is going to face a lot of challenges. But that doesn't mean that it's not something that's worth kind of exploring, because there are spin-off benefits. And it could be part of a kind of a broader strategy in the auto sector, but I don't think it's something we kind of put all our basket we put all our eggs in.
We have a couple minutes left, and I just want you guys to look in your crystal ball. I mean, what do you see 10 years down the road? Are we going to see hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, long-range plug-in hybrids, and end-to-internal combustion engine-only vehicles? Hadrian, do you want to start us off?
I mean, I would love to talk about the global context, because we haven't talked a lot about that. I mean, I mentioned that we're the only economy that moved backwards on EVs in the past year, and the rest of the world is racing ahead. And I really mean racing. So, we're at this year we were at like 10% EV sales, but the global average is 25%. 25% of new sales globally are EVs. In a lot of economies, it's way higher. I mentioned Norway is almost at 100%, functionally 100%. There are edge cases that make it kind of impossible to get to 100, but Norway's at functionally 100%. China's selling more than half of its new vehicles are EVs. A lot of countries in China's orbit, like Vietnam and Singapore, are well over half. But also countries like Nepal, Ethiopia, Uruguay, like not the usual suspects. Like I'm not talking about all these European countries that are also doing well. The point is, it's very much a policy choice. Like these are countries that are just like, we're going to do EVs. And when you choose to do it, you can do it. And we have not chosen to do it for various reasons. And I guess to actually answer your question, like where are we going to be in 10 years? There's going to be a lot of countries at 100% EVs at that point. Like, and there's no reason why China won't be there or close, and all the countries that China supplies will be close to 100% EVs. It's a real open question in North America. A lot of it has to do with the US, which is outside of our control. There is a world where Canada is at or close to 100% EVs. I think that's unlikely. But there's also a world where we're kind of stuck at 30, 40% EVs if we don't really commit to it. So there's a lot of policy decisions that are going to matter.
Abdel?
Before I answer your question, if I can expand on what Hadrian said, it reminds me of the Blockbuster example. They went out of business, they had the chance to acquire Netflix and adopt that new platform, right? So you see a lot of countries, you see companies that ignore a platform change and pay for it over time. So Canada, we're kind of at risk of doing the same mistake, and the U.S. they're committed to that path, but. We will suffer if we don't adopt that. We can be part of that innovation. We can be a leader in that. But to your question regarding what do I see in the future, I think hydrogen vehicles will carve their niche, whether it's long haul. We truly believe EVs are inevitable. The technology, the cost curve, the electric motor compared to internal combustion vehicle is much simpler. You can really drop the cost significantly lower. And the timing is the challenge. How long will it take to get to that future? That's difficult to predict, but we think EVs are inevitable.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank you, Hadrian and Abdel, for that. That was a great discussion. Now we're going to take a 20-minute break before our next session on tariffs and trade. So we will see you in 20 minutes. Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone got a snack and a drink. Next up, we will have a conversation about tariffs and trade and the price of driving, and a lot of what we are going to talk about is going to be China. Big surprise. We have a fantastic group of speakers, so please join me in welcoming. First up, we have Dr. Meredith Lilly, Professor and Simon Reisman Chair in International Economic Policy at Carleton University's Norman Paterson School of International Affairs. Next, we have Ryan Robinson, Automotive Research Leader at Deloitte. And finally, we have Jana Streef, founder and owner of Integrated Custom Services Limited. You're all good, wherever you're sitting.
All right, Meredith, we're going to start with you to add some context. Sort of help us understand how we got here. We don't have to go back to, I guess, the auto pacts, but maybe start with our relationship with the US and China and Biden putting on 100% tariffs on Canada.
Sure. So I do all of North American trade. I don't just look at autos. And so I think it's important when we look at the decisions that were made around EV tariffs to place it in context. So the Biden administration placed tariffs, 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, in part because of the national security concerns, in part because of concerns about the dumping of Chinese product below price, but also because the United States was seeking to create an environment to manufacture and produce EVs in the United States. And they didn't feel they were in a competitive position to do so relative to China. And so then when Canada did this, part of we spend, I think, a little bit too much time in Canada focused on, well, we just went along with the United States. It wasn't just that. It was that we have an integrated North American supply chain, and we wanted to be part of the new EV supply chain, particularly at the battery end. And for us to be part of that, then there was some pressure to mirror tariffs. So that's how we got there. Now, of course, in Canada, one of the challenges that then ensued was that China retaliated against Canadian canola. But I think it's also important for those who mostly spend their time thinking about vehicles. On the canola front, China has done this at least 3 times in the last 10 years. It has retaliated against Canadian canola. In the past, it was because of the detention of Meng Wanzhou. It was because of a Huawei decision. It was because of the failure of Canada to launch free trade negotiations. So I think it's important, as we now look at the removal of those tariffs for a small portion of Chinese imported vehicles, that we know where those original decisions came from.
That's great. Ryan, do you want to add to that?
Well, maybe just to emphasize the point that, we don't have to go all the way back to the auto pact, but certainly into the early 90s, we decided that this was going to be a very integrated, almost wholly integrated North American automotive sector manufacturing industry. So for us not to follow the decisions that the Biden administration made would have been probably counterproductive at that point. So, and there was no way that we couldn't address what was going on to our agricultural sector, right? So, there just was a series of steps to, I think the Prime Minister put it right, it's to walk back, and put right some of the issues that had gone on over the last, let's call it 12 to 18 months, right, between the trade situation between us and China.
Jana, do you want to start just by telling everyone a bit about what your company does, and then maybe say a bit about all the challenges you have faced in the last few years?
Sure, I would like to do that. So I own Integrated Custom Services located in southwestern Ontario. We do have the Toyota manufacturer in my backyard. So we do see a lot of the tier 1, tier 2 the automotive industries that are being built in our area, and servicing all of the Toyota and any of the other auto manufacturing companies. So what do I see? It's been almost a year. In fact, I think a year will be in the beginning of March, when the Trump administration said, you know what, we have been unfairly treated by Canada, so we are going to now introduce tariff surtaxes. I want to call it surtaxes because tariffs we've always had. We've always had tariffs on certain commodities that are coming into Canada. What we are getting now is tariff surtaxes. So it's an extra surtax that the U.S. Administration is applying to us. And it started off in March of 2025, having surtaxes on almost everything. And Canada reacted. And that's what we did for probably the first 6 to 8 months of last year. We simply reacted to all the tariffs that were being implemented until we stopped and said, wait a minute, we have to stop reacting. We need to now be proactive. We know what these tariff surtaxes are doing to our economy. We now need to figure out and diversify through other markets to try and circumvent the cost that it's costing for all the manufacturers and the automotive sector as well, but all manufacturers that are importing into Canada. So my day starts off with, what did he say last night? Because I come into work and then we have emails and phone calls from our clients going, does this affect us? Sometimes the answer is yes. And all of a sudden, we as a customs broker have to be able to read through what happened, identify what the issue is, and be able to go back to our clients and say, this is what you need to do. And one of the biggest things that came out of that for last year and now is, I think you better start diversifying where you're getting your goods. Do it now, not later. And I think that's probably been the biggest thing we've probably told our clients is to start diversifying and looking to other markets. Can you get those goods within the Canadian border? If you can, that's fantastic, because that's what we would like to do. If you can't, can you get them outside of the US, the USA? Start looking at the foreign markets and seeing what we can get there and get that brought in until maybe at some point in time we can have manufacturers for whatever those products are. But it has been very interesting, and in all, I think, 40 plus years I've worked in Canada Customs, I have never experienced anything like this.
Ryan, I see you nodding a lot. What are you telling the clients?
Yeah, I mean, it is a diversification story. The problem is, though, we have to figure out where to get those components from, right? And there's going to be whatever happens with the CUSMA negotiations, and that's a big one that we're obviously going to get to at some point, right? I think all roads lead to what happens and where the dust settles on CUSMA. I woke up today, with the headline that, maybe we're not going to have a CUSMA, right? And maybe that's saber rattling, maybe that's just talk, right? There's something to be said for whether or not that the adults in the room are going to come to, the realization that this is a good thing for all parties involved. But if not, then we have to figure out, okay, well, what does this mean for the automotive sector particularly? We know we have U.S. content rules, which are going to play into this quite heavily. We know that, it's in terms of EVs, if we're going to get batteries from elsewhere, right? Where is that going to come from? How much is that going to cost? How can we use the battery manufacturing capacity that we're already investing in here in southwestern Ontario to service that need, right? So we can't get away from the U.S. I think from a trade perspective. The panel, we've been talking about it probably already many times today, that 90% of the vehicles that we produce go to the U.S. and all of that. The Canadian market just isn't big enough to support even the installed manufacturing capacity that we have, because that was done under a very different environment. So our trading partners, yes, we do need new free trade deals with several other countries, but I think there's something to be said for maximizing the amount of agility that we have to service our own market and transforming the manufacturing capacity you have in that way.
We spend a lot of time talking about the effect on manufacturing. I wanted to focus some of this on the effect on the Canadians and drivers and car shoppers. So what does this ultimately mean for prices? Ryan, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, I can start. It depends, right? I mean, we've seen a variety of different things that are impacting prices or not really impacting prices, if you want to think of it that way. So there's different remission programs, right, that have been talked about as part of even the automotive strategy that was put in place. What was it, a week ago, from the federal government? There's the fact that a lot of the OEMs are still very hesitant to move on their price position, because we're already kind of bumping up against the threshold of affordability in the minds of most consumers. So if you add on the impact of the tariffs, however small that might be, that could have a pretty big impact on your competitive positioning within the market. So there's been a hesitancy to pass on a lot of those added costs directly to the consumer, at least for now. But we've seen now, just in the U.S., for example, automakers are getting to the breaking point, and they're starting to say, we need to take severe write-downs. Part of that is the cost that they're incurring from the tariffs. Part of it is the backing away from EV strategies because of all of the policy changes that we've seen on the environmental front. But all of these things have a limit, right? So I think that there is at least the strong possibility that we're going to continue an environment where pricing is going to be, it's going to pressurize the Canadian consumer quite a bit.
From what I've seen in the Canadian market, it seems like automakers are quite hesitant to increase prices. If there are vehicles that they know are going to be very affected by the tariffs coming straight from the US, they're just not bringing those vehicles in. And then it's not affecting many of the prices, unless it's a high volume seller. But Meredith, how did a lot of these moves end up usually affecting regular Canadians?
Well, I would just add a couple of things. So one thing is, as we increasingly talk about the idea of a all Canadian built and made vehicle, whether that's feasible and whether that's affordable, it also implies less choice, right? And less consumer choice. And so, does everybody want to buy the one Avro, the one single model of Avro, just regardless of the size of your family and your needs? And so, I think we have to bear that in mind as we have that conversation publicly. I think we also have to bear in mind that there are other countries involved in exporting vehicles to Canada. We have free trade agreements through the Trans-Pacific Partnership with countries in the Asia Pacific. We have a free trade agreement with Korea. And so those cars can be imported without facing the US tariffs. If they're just coming to Canada and staying here, then you would not expect there to be major price hikes other than if they're also affected by tariffs in their home jurisdiction.
The one point that I would make, though, is that we do a lot of consumer market research, and we know that month to month there is a significant, a very high number. I'm talking about like 70+% of Canadians right now tell us at least that they feel that new vehicle prices are unaffordable, right? So that's why I say that, however small these price hikes, we've already done everything we can to max out the consumer on where their positioning is relative to the price of cars.
Go ahead, Jenna.
I just want to add something in from the perspective of a customs broker. So when those vehicles are coming in, let's talk about the Chinese EVs, okay? Part of that agreement that I think PM Carney made, and it's still a little vague to me, but some of those vehicles need to be $35,000. Is that Canadian? I'm also looking at that going, okay, I see that vehicle coming out of China. It's coming via marine. It's coming in a container, more than likely into the Vancouver terminal. There is a cost. There's a logistics cost to that. It's being taken off the terminal, put into Vancouver Harbor. There's a cost to that. Then, if the goods have to come in, let's talk about the goods coming into Toronto. Okay, so they're in Vancouver. They're being put on a rail, and they are being railed to the Brampton CN. We're using CN to the Brampton CN rail yard. They're taken off the rail yard. There's all cost, by the way, and put onto a motor carrier, and they're brought into your local dealership. They're unloaded. I'd be very interested to see what the sticker price on that vehicle is when you, the end consumer, are going to that parking lot and taking a look to that dealer's. Because I don't know, $35,000 Canadian, there's a lot of people out there that going, yay, I can actually afford a car. I don't know if that's I don't know if 35,000 is what it's being brought in for. Oh, and don't forget that 6.1% duty. That's also added in there as well. And any custom brokers like me that are involved in getting those goods into the Canadian market as well. I just don't know where that sticker price is.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
And on the 35,000, there is an asterisk in the announcement, which is that is envisioned 5 years from now. So no one's buying a Chinese EV for $35,000 this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably worth noting too that under the new strategy that was laid out, that the $5,000 incentive is only going to be applied on vehicles that are coming in from countries that we have free trade agreements with, right? So that's not going to be China. So I think that it's a step in the right direction. Let's put it that way.
It seemed like from reader comments and talking with people when Carney first announced the China deal and that story and subsequent stories we ran about, for instance, Chery trying to set up shop here, that they're like the story's performed very well, and I think it is that a lot of Canadians think like in the next few months they're going to go out and they're going to buy a $35,000 EV, which is going to get a range of like 1 million kilometers, and going to charge very fast anywhere. But I always caution. I'm like, I don't think that is going to be the reality. So like Jana, when you were explaining that all, I wanted to say, so what you're telling me is we're not going to be going and buying a $35,000 EV.
I hope I'm proven wrong.
I mean, the reality is, you know, and I've heard it, many people have actually said this, right? Probably today they've said this, that the likely outcome is going to be Chinese manufactured vehicles that we've already seen in the marketplace, right? So that's, you know, where we're probably going to start.
Yeah.
We still need to, you know, safety certify and go through all the regulatory hurdles that really every vehicle has to go through, right, in order to be able to be sold here. The domestic Chinese manufacturers still have to, you know, set up a distribution network and then an after sales and a service network, and you know, all those things, all those hurdles have to be cleared, right? They're probably on their way because, you know, they've done a lot of that regulatory work to get into the European market. So they're not starting from scratch, and there is something to be said for us to try to harmonize some of those regulations with other markets to make the flow of vehicles from, you know, markets that we have free trade agreements or agreements in trade anyway, to make that process easier, right? So we're not going to see it right away. It's probably going to take, you know, maybe this time next year we'll start thinking about which domestic OEMs from China are going to be coming in.
So even if the cost to us isn't $35,000, if Chinese EVs are coming into Canada and they are cheaper than what is available now, is that going to force OEMs who are currently selling in Canada to lower prices to be competitive? Jana, do you want to start?
I just have a little bit to say on that.
Yeah.
Right now, those sales coming into Canada are 3% of the total auto sales. I don't think that the big auto companies right now are really concerned about that 3%. Their profit margin is sitting in the 97%. They're going to be completely endorsed in that. Now, will that change? I do believe it will change at some point in time. I don't see that in the near future, but I think there have to be some more competitiveness with the EVs, and I don't know if we've mentioned South Korea. I think PM Carney has talked to South Korea and has offered or made a trade deal. And I really want to tell everybody, deal is different than agreement. A deal is just something between two commodities. An agreement is an actual signed agreement, and this is something President Trump had a little bit of difficulty with when he came after us saying, well, I'm going to put 100% tariff on Canada because you made it an agreement with China. We did not, okay? But I think that the South Korea, he's invited South Korea to actually build plants in Canada to produce EVs, and that would be in a competitive world with the Chinese EVs. So that would make a difference, I think, in the cost of vehicles as well.
Ryan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, if I think about the conversations that are going on with South Korean manufacturers right now, it seems that their conversation is kind of conflating what we need from a defense procurement end of things, right, with submarines and things like that, and then the conversation also kind of overlaps with what they called vehicle manufacturing, but some of these conglomerates that we're talking about do a wide range of things, right? They make everything from container ships, right, to land defensive vehicles, right? There may be more to the story that we just don't have yet in terms of what that opportunity might look like for manufacturing in Canada. I also think that, this is it, and frankly, it's part of the strategy, the defense procurement strategy that we have, that we do need to replenish our defensive capabilities across the board. So that all it's starting to make some sense to me. And it might actually be an opportunity for the suppliers, the indigenous suppliers that we have in Canada to your point, to start to diversify into adjacent sectors. We've seen automotive suppliers now going into construction, right? Maybe, you know, getting further into defense contracts might be a way for them to kind of shore up their manufacturing capacity.
Meredith, do you see if Chinese EVs do come to Canada and they're a lower price, do you think the manufacturers who are currently bringing in cars or manufacturing cars here will be forced to compete more on lower prices?
It's a good question, and I think it's partially a volume answer. So at very low volumes, I don't think so. But to Hadrian's point, if the numbers go up a lot, but right now the numbers are expected to go up 6% per year. And there's no end date to that, but agreements can change and things can change. So if there were large volumes coming in, but I do think that the Prime Minister's announcement, one, was designed to offer a small amount of volume at the beginning, with the understanding that over time these would be joint venture manufacturing in Canada. So that would be different if you're actually if Chinese vehicles are being manufactured in Canada versus being imported. If large volumes of Chinese vehicles are coming into Canada, though, the effect on local producers could be two things. One could be that, yes, they might face price pressure to be more competitive, but they also, I think, will start paying very close attention to the pricing of those Chinese vehicles and are they being dumped in our market. And if they're being dumped in our market, they will have WTO cases, they will have valid trade cases, and so they will start investigating labor standards, environmental standards, and whether vehicles are being subsidized in China to export to Canada, in which case they would fight it on those grounds.
You know, on the pricing front, my answer would be, it probably depends on the segment of vehicle you're talking about, right? Like there's probably not going to be a lot of price pressure on full-size pickup trucks. Probably not, because that's probably not the kind of vehicles that the Chinese domestic manufacturers would be bringing in. But, you know, if you're thinking about the already hyper-competitive market that is compact utility vehicles, probably, right? Maybe the compact sedan market in Canada, you might see a little bit of price pressure. Again, we do a lot of market research, and you know, we still have, it's about addressable market too, right? You still have 50% of the Canadian population that wants to maintain that relationship with internal combustion technology. So, you know, we're not even talking about the addressable market of the whole Canadian market. We're only talking about like half, right? And then, you know, where the OEMs are going to compete within each of those segments. I mean, you start slicing the pie kind of smaller and smaller and smaller, right?
All right, I want to shift to talking about the USMCA renegotiation that is going on now, as I learned from Meredith, and has what's the, July 1st is the what?
The first deadline, which if nothing happens, the agreement continues and we do it all again next year.
So if you can all look into your 8 balls and tell me, what do you think will happen with these negotiations? Janet, do you want to start?
Okay.
Or what do you want to happen?
I would like to go back to where it's a win-win-win situation for all three countries. Can we do that? No, I don't think so. But the NAFTA agreement, which is what I was originally involved in, the NAFTA agreement was a good agreement for Canada. It was. And when we are going in negotiations, we are negotiating for Canada. All of a sudden, the Americans decided that they didn't feel that it was very fair for them. But you know what? The Canadians had great negotiators on staff at that point in time, and that's why we got a great agreement. So what is going to happen now? I believe it's going to start July or at least early fall for negotiations again. One of 3 things I guess can happen. We can come up with an agreement. It's going to extend for the next 16 years, and in 2035 I think we'll have a review of that, and all is good if we are able to negotiate something that we all agree on. If we don't come up with an agreement, what's going to happen is that agreement will come up for annual review every single year. Can the manufacturers of Canada deal with that? When you don't even know what that tariff is going to be, if it's going to rise, if it's going to fall, that's very difficult to do. And then the third one that we don't want to have happen is it simply falls apart. And I don't think that's detrimental for all countries. I don't think that, that's a very good idea. But that's those three things that are going to happen. I would like to see that we come up with some negotiations that is agreeable. I believe that the Americans will be talking about the automotive industry as well as our agricultural industry. They didn't like our dairy quota that we had put in place the last time. That's going to come up definitely for negotiations.
Brian, do you want to add?
How much time do we have? I think that for better or for worse, there are too many signs right now that lead down the road of moving away from a multilateral trade environment globally. I think the U.S. is, the way I see it anyway, the U.S. is very fixated on doing bilateral agreements from this point forward, and that's maybe an effort to maintain leverage on your trading partners, whatever it might be. I think that that's probably where we're headed. And that, in some ways, it is an agreement. Personally, I believe, and I think everybody would want us just to continue what was hailed at the time, a very successful trade agreement, right, between Canada, U.S., and Mexico. Makes things very stable, to your point. Manufacturers, we're already in a state of paralysis to a large degree when it comes to investment. So you need to know where the solid ground is in order to figure out how you're going to move forward in that new way. But we can't afford to keep getting punched in the face. So we need to de-risk ourselves by thinking more strategically about how we need to move forward rather than just reacting to what we're being told.
So we could see a USM deal and a USCA deal and a CAM deal.
Yeah, I think that's where we're headed.
Meredith, I have a feeling you have a few things to say about this.
I have a bunch of thoughts, and I don't actually think that we're headed for bilateral deals, but there will be bilateral negotiations, which took place last time and will take place again this time. So technically, this is a review, not a renegotiation. I feel like I have to defend that from my friends at Global Affairs that might be watching or listening. So it's a 6-year review. Parts of the agreement will be renegotiated. Most of the agreement will stay the same. So we have to remember that this is a very big agreement, and it's all continental trade, more or less. And most parts of the agreement will remain the same, and ideally, trade will remain unfettered between the countries, although it's pretty fettered right now. So it's, and the agreement is vital to the economies of all three countries, and autos is one piece of it, and I'll talk about autos because I know that's why we're here. But I don't want to lose sight of that fact because as we talk about trade diversification, ideally we want to be doing this, preserving trade with the United States while also finding opportunities elsewhere. If we're only talking about finding opportunities elsewhere, that is an economy that's shrinking. That is not an economy that's growing. So if we want to continue to be an economy that's growing, we have to find ways to fix this and sort it out. So negotiations will start in the next few months. They're already talking to Mexico formally. That has not yet begun formally with Canada. But one thing that we know is that the United States has completed its stakeholder consultations, and they were pretty much unanimous that Americans want to keep USMCA. So the president knows that. USTR Greer knows that. And preserving the agreement is important to the United States. So that's a pretty important part of this. If we get to July the 1st and the three countries have not all collectively agreed to renew, then we go into this 10-year period of annual reviews. That will be very disruptive to business because certainty and stability are two things the private sector wants, and annual reviews do not sound like certainty and stability. So we know that autos is probably going to be one of the most volatile parts of the discussions. My crystal ball, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I fully anticipate the United States to push for greater local content, and it is pressuring US headquartered firms to repatriate into the United States, and we heard that earlier this afternoon. And we heard earlier today some ideas about what that might look like from what we used to call the Auto Pact. But then there's all kinds of other parts of the agreement that we will discuss as well. USTR Greer on the US side has been very clear about what they want from Canada. They've produced a list. The list hasn't actually changed in about 5 years. The Biden administration had the same list. If anyone wants to know what's on the list, you just have to look up the trade barriers report from 2025. And so I actually think it's achievable from a technical level, but my real concern is what happens when it moves out of the technical negotiations and into the White House. And that, I think, I worry a lot about extortionary demands being placed at that time. What might those look like, and will Canada be able to weather those stormy seas at the time?
So if things go badly, let's say, is there a scenario where we make up the trade with another partner if we are not trading nearly as much with the US?
No. 75% of our exports go to the United States. So we can and should work to diversify our trade, but it's going to be incremental and it's going to be on the margin. We're talking about 5 or 6%. The Prime Minister has stated a goal of doubling non-US exports over, is it 10 years, I think? And a lot of that will come from our natural resources, from oil and gas, from building pipelines, from nation-building projects. And those are great things, but diversification is as much about creating leverage with the Americans as it is about turning away from the Americans. So as I said, like, in my view, I think it has to be trading with the United States plus looking to other economies. If we seek to pivot away from the United States, I do not see another economy that can fill that for us.
Ryan, did you want to add to that?
No, I agree. I think it's taken us a long time to put ourselves in this particular pickle in the first place, so it's going to take a long time for us to get out. So I do agree with that. I do think that there's lots of opportunity for certain sectors of our economy to diversify maybe a little bit quicker than others, with some of the trade talks that are already going on with other partners that we're opening up. But yeah, I mean, you just can't ignore the elephant in the room in the U.S., right? You just can't. So, but the problem is, how do you get to a situation where you can solve for the U.S. while solving for diversification, right? Those two things, I mean, in some ways they're kind of competing against one another, right? So, and I agree that, once it gets to the White House, kind of anything can happen. I do think that there are some strategic decisions to be made if, just the supply management issue, to take one, that is definitely on the table from the US perspective, and it's definitely off the table from the Canadian perspective.
The dairy supply management.
Right. So how do you come to some agreement on that front?
Not completely off the table. So technically, what USTR Greer has listed and what the Biden administration listed and what the first Trump administration listed is Canada's TRQ allocation mechanism process. This is like quite in the weeds, but it's not actually the Canadian dairy quota. It's how we allocate that quota, and that continues to be what USTR Greer puts in writing and says is his concern. That is not what we see coming out of the White House and Truth Social, but that is the issue. And that issue is not off the table for Canada because we've just had to change that process for New Zealand because we were found to be in violation of our trade agreement because of the way we allocate quota. So it is solvable, that specific issue.
Let's hope.
We have a few minutes left now, and I would like to turn it over to the audience. We'll start with people in the room. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Yes, Brendan up front here. If you want to just wait for the mic, Brendan.
I'm wondering about the pricing structure of a Chinese branded, Chinese made vehicle when it would get to North America. In the UK and Germany, a BYD starts at around the equivalent of $55,000 Canadian. So it's not $35,000 or $17,000. And what I'm curious about, you address some of it. There's going to be some costs at the port and on the rail. But what I don't know if many of us understand at all is what's the dealership margin in China, and does that differ from what one would expect from North America, or largely how do people buy cars in China versus the dealership system that we're used to here? I don't know one way or another. I don't know if anybody else knows, but that's what I'm interested in. So
I don't know either, but I do know that once that sticker price gets on to the window of that car and you go out and take a look at it, do we all have enough disposable income to actually afford whatever that price is? So that's going to be very important. If there's going to be, do they want to sell those EVs, and how bad do they want to sell them and get them into the market? Then that's going to be part of the affordability as well.
So the way that I would answer that question is we know that there has been just a ferocious price war going on in the Chinese domestic market for about 2 years plus now. So I would think that the margins are relatively thin, if at all, right now in China. And that's partly why the larger players are looking for export markets, right? If the domestic Chinese economy, as far as automakers go, there's over 100 different brands making vehicles in China right now for the Chinese market. And some companies have no business making cars at all. So if there was a more, and we're still waiting for this kind of Darwinian kind of culling of the herd, if you will, in the Chinese market, which might actually alleviate some of the pressure that these larger companies feel to export. The other issue is, we can't just pin it on government subsidies of domestic Chinese automakers. We're doing a lot of work with our clients here in North America to identify and quantify the very tangible competitive advantages on cost that Chinese manufacturers have. And it extends far beyond just getting free land and access to financing and things like that. I mean, they are a lot better and a lot faster at developing vehicles, a lot better and faster at employing software technologies, robotics, physical AI. I mean, all of those things are happening and have been happening for quite a while in China. So, you know, it's not just, you know, thinking about, well, the Chinese government subsidized all these vehicles and they're just going to dump them around the world, right? These are really sophisticated companies, and we shouldn't. I mean, we underestimate them at our own peril, is what I would say, right? So, you know, there's in that 35,000 landed cost, right? There's a lot of sophistication going on to lower the cost of manufacturing that goes into that.
Milo, did we have any questions come in from the online audience?
Nothing that was already covered.
All right, if no one else in the room. Oh, one more. We have time for one more question, so this is perfect.
Hi there. Thinking about the cost element again, is there a possibility that Canadians willing to potentially spend more just because a product isn't coming from the U.S. or supporting a product made in Canada, or supporting a product that they see as somehow harming the U.S. or punishing them for the current state, could affect things in the short term? So we have a few years of Chinese product coming into Canada, people willing to spend more just to support it. Is that something that you foresee as a option? And this is really coming from a place of certain research saying Canadians at least willing, when asked, saying that they're willing to spend more to boycott the USA or American brands or buy Canadian, etc.
Sure, I can start. Perhaps, although, some of the research that we do on the consumer base suggests that around about half or a little bit more than half of consumers, when asked if it matters where the brand of their vehicle, their next vehicle, originates, right? Whether it's domestic or imported. And just over half of consumers say it doesn't matter, to them at least, where the brand is perceived to have originated, as long as the vehicle itself meets their specific needs, right, for transportation. So I think there's a possibility of that maybe in the near term, but overall, I think that people are just going to buy what they can afford to buy, that still meets their needs for utility, for mobility. So yeah, I think it might, but only to a point.
Can I just add to this? I maybe should have said this earlier. We actually do have Chinese-made EVs in Canada right now. Yeah. Like we have the Polestar 2 and we have the Volvo, the XC, no, one of the Volvos, the small crossovers.
And Teslas.
And Teslas. And people, they were priced pretty much the exact same that they are now. So it's hard to think that if they suddenly switched from wherever they're being made now to go back to being made in China, that it would actually decrease the price.
I would just add on willingness to pay versus what people actually then do pay is an interesting question. But there's lots of vehicles that Canadians could purchase if they don't want to buy a vehicle that's made in the United States. There's lots of great cars made in Canada, and at the risk of sounding like I'm complimenting the sponsor, the most popular car in Canada is the RAV4, which is a Toyota product, and so the assumption that people would want to proactively go and buy a Chinese EV unless it's a price point issue, I'm not sure that. I don't know if we have any evidence to support that.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. I know we could keep talking about this all day, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it for a long time to come. But for now, I would like to thank Dr. Meredith Lilly, Ryan, and Jana for being here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Globe and Mail. I would like to thank Toyota Canada for sponsoring today's event. I'd also like to thank all of our panelists for their valuable insights and our audience for listening in. We'll be sending out a survey regarding today's events, and we'd greatly appreciate it if you could take a minute to complete it. For virtual attendees, a QR code will now be up, allowing you to complete it. A link to the recorded webcast will be sent to all registered participants within the next 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. And for our in-house audience, we will conclude with some networking and refreshments. Thank you.